My name is Sophia, and I'm the woman you walk past without noticing. I'm not rich. I'm not famous. I don't look special. But I carry a story that might live in someone like you. For most of my life, I did what people told me to do. I worked hard, stayed quiet, and tried to be good. I followed all the rules. And yet, nothing ever seemed to change. At 29, I was working in a dusty storage warehouse on the edge of the city. Every morning, I lifted heavy boxes, wrote labels, cleaned the floor, and smiled at people who didn't even remember my name. I was tired all the time. My back hurt, my hands were rough, and my clothes always smelled like cardboard. But the worst part wasn't the work. It was the silence in my heart. I felt like I had no voice, no dreams, and no place in this world. When I was younger, I wanted to be a teacher. I used to sit with my little cousins and pretend I was leading a class. I would hold a book, speak slowly, and help them spell new words. But I never became one. My father said, "That's not a job for someone like us." We were poor. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked nights at the train station. There was never enough money for dreams. After high school, I worked at a cafe, then a grocery store, then the warehouse. I told myself, this is just life. But deep inside, I knew I was lying. I was not living. I was surviving. One night, I came home with a headache and dirty shoes. My small apartment was cold, and the light in the kitchen kept flickering. I sat on the floor and opened a can of soup. As I ate, I looked at my old laptop sitting on the shelf. It hadn't been used in months. Dust covered the screen. I stared at it for a long time. Then, something small moved inside me. A voice I hadn't heard in years whispered, "Try again." At first, I wanted to laugh. Try what? I was too tired, too old, too late. But the voice didn't go away. That night, I searched for free online courses. My internet was slow. My eyes were heavy. But I found a site that taught English teaching methods. I had forgotten how much I loved language. I clicked Start. The first lesson was simple. Then came the second. I didn't stop. Every night after work, I studied for 2 hours. At first, I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend Anna. I knew they would say, "Why are you wasting your time?" So I said nothing. I just studied, quietly, every night. After 2 weeks, I noticed something strange. I felt a little stronger. My body was still tired, but my mind was awake. I walked into work with a notebook in my bag. During breaks, I read grammar tips instead of looking at my phone. When I got home, I sat at the table and practiced speaking into a mirror. I was shy, but I did it anyway. One day, I made a mistake while reading a lesson. I felt embarrassed, but I didn't stop. I kept going. And that's when I realized something important. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to keep going. 3 months passed. I had finished 3 full courses. My English had improved a lot. I could understand videos, read short stories, and even write my own lesson plans. Still, I didn't feel ready. I was scared. What if I failed? What if I applied for a job and they laughed at me? What if I wasn't good enough? That's when Anna finally found out. She came over one evening and saw my notes on the table. "What's all this?" she asked. I froze. I thought she would laugh, but she didn't. She sat down, looked at my work, and smiled. "Sophia, this is amazing. Why didn't you tell me?" That moment changed everything. For the first time, I saw myself through someone else's eyes. I wasn't just a warehouse worker. I was someone who refused to give up. Someone who studied when no one was watching. Someone who believed, even when it hurt. Anna told me about a local school looking for part-time assistants. It wasn't a full teaching job, but it was a start. I was scared, but I applied. A week later, they called me for an interview. On the day of the interview, I wore my cleanest shirt and fixed my hair. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced my answers. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like a drum. When I entered the school office, the smell of books made my eyes water. The interviewer was kind. She asked simple questions. I told her about my courses, my passion, and my dream. I spoke slowly, clearly, and honestly. She smiled and said, "We'd love to have you." I walked home with tears in my eyes, not because I had a job, but because I had finally chosen the hard road. I had said no to comfort, no to fear, no to the voices that told me I was nothing. I had said yes to work, to growth, to quiet strength. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed, watching the shadows on the wall. My hands still hurt from lifting boxes. My feet were sore, but my heart was light. For the first time in years, I felt proud. That was just the beginning. The school was small. My pay was low. I had to keep working at the warehouse in the mornings. But in the afternoons, I stood in front of children, helping them learn English. When they raised their hands or smiled at a new word, I felt something I can't explain. Not just happiness, something deeper. Like I had finally returned home to the life I was meant to live. It wasn't easy. Some days I wanted to quit. Some nights I cried from pain and pressure, but I didn't stop. Because I had learned one powerful truth. The hard road is not a punishment. It is a gift. It's the path that breaks you, shapes you, and builds you into someone new, someone stronger, someone real. One evening, as I closed my books and turned off the lights, I looked at my old warehouse shoes by the door. They were still dirty, still cracked, but they told a different story now. Not one of tiredness, but of courage. Not of failure, but of faith. I had walked a long, hard road, and somehow, step by step, it had saved my life. It was my 3rd month at the school, and I still felt nervous every time I walked into the classroom. My hands sometimes shook when I picked up the whiteboard marker. My voice was not always strong, but I showed up. Every day, I stood in front of a group of smiling, loud, curious children, and every day, I gave them everything I had. I prepared my lessons with care, printed activities with my own money, and stayed late to clean the classroom. I wasn't a full teacher yet, just an assistant. But I took the job seriously. These small steps mattered to me. They were the stones I used to build a new life. The school staff was friendly, but some of them didn't really see me. They still treated me like I was just a helper, someone to pass papers or watch the children during lunch. One teacher, Mrs. Lucia, often asked me to do tasks that weren't in my role. At first, I did everything without question. I thought that was the right thing to do. But over time, I began to feel small again, like I was invisible. I remembered how I felt at the warehouse. I didn't want to live like that anymore. So one afternoon, I took a deep breath and spoke to her. "I want to help," I said, "but I also want to grow. I'd like to do more teaching work if possible." She looked surprised. Then she said, "I didn't know you wanted that." I nodded and said, "Yes, I've been studying hard. I want to become a real teacher one day." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, I'll speak to the head teacher." I walked home that day feeling proud of myself. Not because I had done something big, but because I had used my voice. That was new for me. I used to stay silent. I used to wait for others to see me. But now, I was learning to speak for myself. 2 weeks later, I was given a small group of students to teach once a week. It was only 30 minutes, but to me, it felt like a new world. I spent hours planning that first lesson. I wrote every question, every instruction, and every word I would say. When the day came, I stood in front of 5 young students with big eyes and small notebooks. I said, "Hello, my name is Miss Sophia, and today we're going to learn about animals." Their faces lit up. They smiled, listened, and followed my lead. For the first time, I felt like a real teacher. Not because someone gave me a title, but because I showed up, I prepared, and I gave my best. That night, I called my mother. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out. She had always worried about money and safety. She didn't understand my dream. But when I told her about the class, her voice changed. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. I smiled and said, "Thank you, Mama." That was all I needed. Still, life wasn't easy. I was working 2 jobs now. Warehouse in the mornings, school in the afternoons. My weekends were full of study and lesson planning. Some days I woke up with a heavy head and a heavy heart. I missed rest. I missed fun. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered why I started. I didn't choose this path because it was easy. I chose it because it was right. One Friday, after school, the head teacher called me into her office. I felt my stomach turn. Had I made a mistake? Was I being replaced? She smiled and said, "We've been watching your work. The children love you. You're doing very well." I sat up straight. My hands were shaking. Then she said, "We'd like to offer you more hours. 2 extra groups per week. If you're interested." I nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you. I'd love that." I left the office with my heart full. That evening, I didn't study. I didn't plan. I didn't do anything but sit on my bed and cry. Not because I was sad, because I was finally beginning to believe in myself. More hours meant more money, which helped a lot. I didn't have to borrow from Anna anymore. I could buy better food, fix my broken lamp, and even save a little each month. But more than money, it gave me confidence. I began to speak more during meetings. I gave suggestions. I asked questions. I started helping new assistants who came after me. I was becoming someone I never thought I could be. One morning at the warehouse, my manager pulled me aside. "Sophia, your shifts have been reduced," he said. "We're hiring more people, and you'll only work 3 mornings now." I felt panic rise in my chest. What would I do? I needed that money. But then I remembered the new teaching hours. I took a breath and said, "Okay, thank you for telling me." I walked away, feeling calm. For the first time, I didn't feel like the warehouse was my future. It was just part of my past. That weekend, I went to the park with Anna. We sat on a bench, drinking tea from paper cups. She looked at me and said, "You've changed." I smiled. "How?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "You stand taller. You speak with more strength. You're becoming the woman you were always meant to be." Her words touched me deeply. I looked around at the trees, the children playing, the old couple walking slowly. I felt at peace. In my heart, I knew I still had a long way to go. I wasn't a full teacher yet. I hadn't taken the final exam. I still lived in a small apartment and used second-hand clothes. But I was no longer lost. I had a path now. A purpose. A reason to wake up. That evening, I made a list. At the top, I wrote, "Next goals." The first line was, "Pass the B2 English exam." The second, "Apply for a full teaching job." The third, "Move to a better apartment." I looked at the list and didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. Because the hard road had taught me something important. You don't need to be special to succeed. You just need to keep going when no one sees you. You need to choose growth over comfort again and again. You need to be brave enough to start and strong enough to continue. And most of all, you need to believe that your story is not finished. Not yet. The exam day arrived on a cold Saturday morning. I woke up before the sun and sat quietly at the kitchen table, holding a cup of tea in my hands. My notes were open beside me, but I couldn't read them. My heart was too loud. I looked at the wall where I had pinned my goal list. The first line said, "Pass the B2 English exam." Today, I would try. I wore my best clothes, brushed my hair neatly, and took the bus to the exam center. On the way, I watched the people outside the window. Some were walking dogs. Some were riding bikes. Everyone seemed busy with their own lives. I wondered if they had ever walked a hard road too. Probably yes. We all carry things the world doesn't see. At the center, other students were waiting. Some looked nervous. Some looked confident. I sat down and closed my eyes for a moment. I whispered to myself, "You've worked hard. You're ready. Do your best." And I meant it. The exam had 4 parts: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The reading part was the easiest for me. I had spent months reading in English. Writing was harder, but I had practiced many essays. Listening was fast, but I focused carefully. Then came the speaking part. That was always the most difficult. My voice wanted to hide, but I stood up, walked into the room, and looked at the examiner. She smiled and asked me simple questions. "What's your name? Where are you from? What do you do?" I answered with a smile. Then came more questions. I took a deep breath before each answer. I made small mistakes, but I kept going. When I finished, I felt something strange. Not fear, not stress. Relief. I had done it. No matter the result, I had tried. And that alone was a victory. The results would take 2 weeks. During that time, I returned to work and stayed busy. At the school, I now had 4 student groups. I was planning lessons, helping children read, and learning from the other teachers. I also started preparing a simple CV. Anna helped me write it. I printed 5 copies and kept them in my bag. I didn't know when I'd need them, but I wanted to be ready. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the classroom, the head teacher came in. "Sophia," she said, "we're opening a new part-time teaching role next month. Would you like to apply?" I almost dropped the cloth in my hand. "Yes," I said quickly. "I would love to." She smiled and said, "Good. We'll speak more next week." After she left, I sat down in one of the small chairs and held my face in my hands. I didn't cry. I just sat still, full of quiet joy. A few days later, the exam results arrived by email. I was too scared to open the message at first. I looked at the screen for 5 minutes before clicking. Then I saw the words, "Congratulations, you have passed the B2 English examination." I stared at the screen in silence. My eyes filled with tears. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and said to myself, "You did it." That evening, I visited Anna with a cake. We sat on her balcony, laughing and talking about the future. She said, "You've worked so hard, Sophia. You really chose the hard road." I nodded and replied, "And it saved me." We looked at the stars and stayed quiet for a while. Some moments don't need words. The next month, I was offered the part-time teaching job. It was official. I was now a teacher, not an assistant, not a helper, a real teacher. I printed my new title and pinned it next to my list. That night, I made a new goal list. The first line said, "Take the C1 exam." The second said, "Create my own lesson materials." The third, "One day, open a small school." With my new job, I could leave the warehouse. On my last day there, I cleaned my locker and folded my old uniform. I looked around the place one last time. It had been a hard job, but it helped me survive. I whispered, "Thank you," then walked out with my head held high. I moved to a better apartment. It was still small, but it had a big window and more light. I bought a second-hand bookshelf and filled it with English teaching books. Every time I looked at it, I felt proud. At school, the students began to call me Teacher Sophia. Their voices were loud and happy. I helped them read new words, play learning games, and feel safe. One little boy gave me a flower made from paper. On it, he had written, "Thank you for teaching me." I kept that flower in my notebook. Life was not perfect. Some days were hard. Some lessons didn't go well. Sometimes I felt tired or unsure. But now, I had something stronger than fear. I had experience. I had growth. I had proof that hard work leads somewhere. 1 year after my exam, I was invited to speak at a small event for adult learners. I stood in front of 30 people and told my story. I spoke slowly and clearly. I told them about the warehouse, the night classes, the exam, and the long hours. I said, "You don't need to be perfect to begin. You just need to begin." When I finished, people clapped. Some had tears in their eyes. A woman came to me and said, "You gave me hope." I smiled and said, "That's why I'm here." Now when I look back, I see a long road. A road full of tired nights, early mornings, mistakes, and small wins. I didn't take the easy path. I took the one full of pain and effort. But that path changed me. It broke my limits. It built my strength. It gave me a new life. So if you're listening to this and thinking, "I can't do it," let me tell you something important. You can. You really can. Not all at once. Not without fear. But step by step, word by word, day by day. The hard road isn't there to hurt you. It's there to lead you somewhere beautiful, somewhere true, somewhere that feels like home. And if you keep walking, one day you'll look back and say, "It was never easy, but it was always worth it." If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.